So I'm trying to figure it out. And apparently, this makes sense now. Um, you may or may not be in that situation where after I filed that case, filed my motion, they mischaracterized it as an amicus curiae when it was absolutely not an amicus curiae. And regardless of whatever else I tried to do, they wouldn't change it. They wouldn't change the information on the system. And not only that, they put me as like a ping point, completely separate from either the plaintiffs or the respondents, and they kept pinging me. You've been pinging me for years, and I know what happens. They take scenarios that have to do with the people that are listed above the line, they ping them off of me, and then somehow it gets captured. They may or may not invert it sometimes because of whatever else has been going on with the things that have been happening for a substantial amount of time for that. It's one of the reasons I requested a new trial. But one of the things that happens sometimes is on these cross currents. Things end up happening, and I've insisted of going through the court process because I do believe these are capital charges and there should be actual executions. But something happened, and I think that's part of what's being triggered. First of all, whatever's going on with Ted Cruz trying to do his little commando cameraman thing is different than whatever happened with Matt Gaetz in the basement of the Capitol building. From what I understand, everybody involved in what he and they did in the basement of the Capitol building in 2019 were adults above the legal age of consent and were citizens of the United States. Not only that, but if I'm not incorrect, they would have been bonded as members of Congress and or the actual legislators, and or if I'm not incorrect, a number of them, if not, were also licensed attorneys, which means they would have had their own kind of insurance and their own kind of bonding and surety as people that would have been licensed as some form of legal representative, which gives them a very, very different security than even a congressional staffer, if that's what it is, but much less people that are under detention in a detention center facility. Just so you know. A. B. There has been accusations that have gone on for a considerable amount of time, and I will acknowledge them. But first, I want to put them in an appropriate context. It was in, I believe, November or December 2017. I was living on the streets. I was literally sleeping outside. And I was literally being subjected to directed energy weapons. Not only was I being electronically tortured, I had just come across information about two events. One had to do with a shooting at a church in Texas. And my understanding was I had just in that amount of time, found an old copy of the Texas Rules of Appellate Procedure that discussed a special rule that it was no longer in the current versions of the Texas Rules of Appellate Procedure regarding special proceedings that a judge could engage. And the metric coded to that specific rule was a metric that had a frequency that resonated with particular biophysiological processes. And my understanding is that it was actually being used at that time. Somebody was using an old case or was using an old case specific to extraordinary process that could be engaged around writs of habeas corpus to electronically torture me in a very specific manner. I just found this information within about 2 weeks of the event I'm speaking of. And what happened was one day I was on the street and I went into a store while I was being tortured. When I went into the store, I looked at the newspaper. And in the newspaper, there was an article discussing how Ted Cruz had just had a meeting with parents of homeschooled children and was going to discuss with them and had discussed with them how in the upcoming years there were going to be new methods of financing for children that were homeschooled. And as soon as I read it, I had a particular understanding. And I became very angry. And I went outside, and I already know that the sonic equipment outside recorded me saying, I'm going to kill you. And I did say that. I said that out loud. I actually screamed out loud, I'm going to kill you. And after I said that vocalization, I said, I'm going to take you to court. I'm going to have you prosecuted. I'm going to have you executed. Now, did I say I was going to kill him? Yes, I did. Do I intend to see capital offenses prosecuted and capital punishment delivered? Yes. If Ted Cruz did, in fact, agree to engage in processes of electronically sexually exploiting one group of children in order to provide financing for anything up to and including alleged educational financing for another group of children. Those are capital offenses. Now, I know that he actually went to the Supreme Court and minced words about whether or not sexual assault of an 11-year-old was a capital offense on par with sexual assault of a 13-year-old. It's the only thing I've ever heard or read about any of the work that Ted Cruz did before he was elected to the Senate. I listened to that presentation that he made before the Supreme Court in that case. I don't do that. Because just so you know, the little girl I homeschooled that was electronically sexually exploited for somebody else's school financing wasn't even 11. And it wouldn't matter to me if she was 15. And it wouldn't matter to me if she was 16. And it wouldn't matter to me if she was in the course of trying to get her driver's license and somebody strategically broke her foot so that she would be booted and then tried to require her to masturbate, or they sexually tortured her genitals while she was actually in a situation where she was needing medical treatment for having a broken ankle. And somebody thought they were justified using that to finance anything, even somebody else's homeschooling paradigm. See, I would consider that a capital offense. And I would not go and try to risk leverage some derivative black ops that were being set up in the anticipation that one day I would run for president with justices of the Supreme Court when I was trying to hedge on which age range would give me a point spread of years that I could try to broker deals on minors regarding sexual assault. I wouldn't do that. I also wouldn't have sexually terrorized a woman that had come to my office with information. If a woman or even a man came to my office and said, I saw somebody set up accounts using your identity where they engaged in acts of money laundering involving electronic sex acts with minors, and I need for you to do, the last thing I would do is get caught trying to electronically sexually torture her or other people she used to be involved with for years. The last thing I would do would be to co-conspire with efforts to steal her life and the lives of her former students and try to parse them out as contracts for weapons companies. Do you understand? There's a very considerable difference. Now, would I teach my child how to use weapons? Yes, I would. Would I teach my child how to be competent with weapons? Yes, I would. Would I teach my child the law? Yes. Would I let somebody else sexually exploit or electronically sexually exploit another child in order to pay for my child's education? No. And my concern and my understanding is that he did. And not only did he, but a whole lot of other people did, and they want to pass it off as their culture. And they want to say that somehow that it's justified. And that the problem is that I am not recognizing their culture. And in so far as it's not only about culture, but that they believe that they have the backing of their faith calling, justifying that it is okay to racially and otherwise typecast certain groups of people to be made available for electronic torture and especially electronic sexual torture as part of a financing paradigm that is supposed to benefit somebody else that has been determined to be either morally or otherwise pure enough to be availed of the advantages, then I believe they need to be prosecuted. And they need to be considered in accordance with an understanding that they're involved with capital crimes and that we have an urgency to deliver on our commitment to deter against future commission of such crimes by executing the criminals, not allowing for an extrajudicial process where we may or may not get away with knocking off opposition. But the state takes responsibility for taking down the culprit in the light of day, on the record, for everybody to know when and how it was justified and accomplished. Period. That's the only legitimate financing that would provide any form of restitution for what Texas has been trying to get away with since I've been here, at least actively since September 1st of 2017 that I physically, personally saw and could directly connect a policy implemented by the state of Texas. Now, if you want to talk about what happened at the shelters I was in Texas involving women and children, including women and children that were constantly being surveilled by cameras that could be remotely accessed, and to this day have not been put in a system where that camera feed can be made available to me as evidence in attempting to redress those grievances, and that's a different consideration. But I meant it. If in fact he did do those things and he did commit to that and he's still continuing to conspire to follow through on that, they're capital offenses. He should be executed.